Well, I thought I'd address a few concepts that we consider in mainstream philosophy from ancient times to now, and political theory especially, and it crops up in religion at times. The concept of, for instance, freedom, liberty. I can say I'm free to do so and so, which means I can do it. Nothing's hindering me. That might be good if I want to do it, and I suppose if I don't want to do it, but I'm free to do it if I want. Well, I don't know if the freedom's of any value in that case, but still have it, but not exercising it. But of course, if the exercise of my freedom harms someone else, is at someone else's cost, well, it's probably not such a good thing in that case. Unless, the other person is willing to suffer the cost. Or perhaps I could compensate them in some way. And then I'll make the decision as to whether it's still worth doing. Or is the compensation greater than the benefit to me of exercising the freedom? Do you see, freedom is not necessarily a good thing. My freedom to rule over you might exist. I can do it. But it's certainly not your freedom in that case. Unless I'm, something like benevolent, So it's that we're not pressing for freedom of the individual. That would be a nonsense. We're pressing for the good. If the good can be achieved with certain freedoms, well, we'd like those freedoms. That would be nice. But if, on the other hand, giving such freedoms causes more harm than good, well, that freedom's not good, is it? We don't want it. It's a very straightforward thing in that sense. You might say, loosely speaking, we have a free society. Do you mean 100%? Oh my goodness, no, it would be frightening anarchy out there, and of course it would be a self-contradiction because his freedom is my loss of freedom and so on. So it's not at all clear what we mean by saying we need a free libertarian society. We'd have to sort of fill in the details, wouldn't we, as to know how to respond to such a statement. If we don't have noble, ethical leaders, but rather very, if you like, self-centered, grabbing individuals looking for maximizing power and control, then our liberty will be at risk. Does this mean we have to fight in such circumstances to achieve such freedoms as we are anxious to have? Possibly, just as you may have to fight a foreign country that wishes to keep you in its subservient to it. Like empires typically are like that. And you'd have to make a rational decision, in uncertainty, of course, as to whether fighting was the best response in such a circumstance. Whether you might win or might lose could greatly influence your decision. If you're going to lose and then be subservient anyway, you might as well be subservient by consent. course, the fact that the outcome is unknown may change the rationality of that decision. So if you think, yes, but there is a possibility, and it's worth the possibility of fighting, of getting a good outcome. What sort of constitution do you need to protect yourself against your nobility becoming ruthless and oppressing the poor, your wealthy elites? Well, a society that tends to give a better distribution of wealth and income might help. It's not quite clear what will encourage that. Or, if you like, how to get such policies through if the elite are already in power, of course. We exercise in some Western constitutions separation of powers in the elite structure, so that the legislature is separate to the executive branches of government to some extent, and the judiciary is separate again. And there may be a constitution in place that is difficult to change in the short run. There are ways of delaying dramatic changes that could, in effect, disenfranchise the bulk of the population or steamroll their present rights. Now, in the world that we have made, our political, sociological world, we have created rights and redress of grievance if those rights are pressed upon or disregarded. But of course, rights are not in themselves good things. You might have the right to have the monopolistic sale of some goods and ruthlessly exploit the market and the consumer, but for government intervention. So rights are a very artificial thing. What we're interested in with is the consequence of rights. Is the consequence of instituting a set of rights more valuable to you than not having such? In other words, we're comparing possible outcomes. The value of a right is in the extent to which it has good or bad results in practice. Does it improve people's welfare, instituting such rights, or not? It's not that rights per se are necessarily good, any more than liberty per se. And freedom is good. Just because you're freer doesn't mean to say you're better. You've got a better situation. And society generally, of course. And same with rights too. So, it might be that people have the right to land because they've earned it, been given it, won it, or inherited it. But it may result in a very unkind distribution of land in your society, in which case such rights would be just considered harmful. Ultimately, what we mean by good and bad is its consequence on a relevant set of people. Is it just in the king's interest? Is it in just certain genders' interest or culture's interest, particular national nation or group of people? Is it just in people's interest, not animals? You know, they're going extinct left, right and centre and you're exploiting them and causing pain and suffering. So what we mean by good and bad is in relation to what we value. And of course we're not in agreement what we value. I might value my family much more highly than the family next door. And my race much higher than other people's race. And so on. There's nothing universally right in ethics. You know, I mean, we've seen that, haven't we? And should we always tell the truth? No, sometimes the truth is extremely harmful. It upsets people because they're wrestling with it and, you know, it's very unkind. Or it results in the fugitive that you're hiding being revealed because you tell the truth as to where he is to, you know, the Gestapo or something. Of course, you can have means whereby power elites are not constantly re-elected to political office. And of course not funded by the political office, not funded by power elites paying for their electoral expenses and so on. Of course, you could be encouraging in your culture a concern for others, a concern for holding ethical people in high esteem, so that you're not chosen for office unless you're known to be reliable and so on. However, in our large population democracies, well, you don't know the candidates, do you, to choose from. You're at the mercy of publications and media and advertising and so forth. You could take a very cynical view and say there's never been a democracy any more than there's ever been a truly communist state experiment on a large scale. And what we've named to be democratic or communist and so on would hardly take the test of analysis of such. Obviously, those that have power will use their power to gain more power, unless they're particularly ethical in perhaps your understanding of the word. Interesting quote here I've got on page 209 of Philosophy in History. Oh, that was the book in which I had Alistair McIntyre's article in. And this one is by Quentin Skinner. But listen to this quote. You can never hope to make yourself secure except by the exercise of power. And we see this in Cold War and international political strife between nations, don't we? And the author here goes through the examples of Machiavelli, who basically argues no holds barred and deceit and terrible things are necessarily going to be done in wars. There have certainly in the past been nations and cultures that have exercised a certain code of ethics in wars. not to treat prisoners and so on, and, well, originally whether you would kill civilians, only the military. I mean, this may have been largely self-interest. You don't want to destroy your labour on the population that you're intending to dominate. Of course, in many cases, the ordinary peasant, the ordinary member of society, is having such a rough time under the present leader. It makes no difference if there's a change of domination over him. It's just as bad. Could actually be better, in fact. Interesting too, the argument in page 210 that you can't not go to war if you're faced with enslavement, if the enemy simply take charge over your country. It's the same sort of problem as I can't not be violent if I'm to protect my family from abuse and so on. Or the enemy, you know. What are the qualities understood to be needed in the citizens of a country, especially those in leadership? But courage to fight for what you value, temperance, orderliness, or as Cicero's formulation is listed, prudence, justice, courage, and temperance. And if your leadership doesn't have that, then well, I'm not really so concerned as to whether your people have liberty or not. It's whether they have happiness, or are they being exploited or not. That's the important thing, isn't it? Whether you classify this as liberty and what liberty means is not the point. You need those qualities in your leaders to be sure that the decisions they make are going to a considerable extent take you into account. Not just treat you as a resource in their narrowly personal values. I paused there because, I had a night's sleep between this and the next part. So this is part A and the next will be part B, okay? Thank you, Heavenly Dad.